Today, I'm talking about 4 more ego defense mechanisms that you probably aren't seeing, whether you do them or people around you do them. I'm going to start by defining ego defense mechanisms, because some people may be like, what the hell is that? Some of you are like, I know exactly what you're talking about, so let's just define it. So basically, ego defense mechanisms, they're our way of protecting our egos from negative feelings of some kind. And what happens is we sort of distort reality in order to meet our worldviews and to avoid extra thinking or avoid obviously negative feelings and the extra efforts that we have to take in. We could use these mechanisms to avoid self-reflection too, especially things in the uncomfortable realm. We use these consciously or subconsciously to, you know, kind of stay safe and live in our own bubbles. Let's get into the 4. Number 1 is splitting. Splitting is when you view reality as black or white, right? Good and bad. There's like this duality that you view the world in. So if you support a cause, like you view yourselves as the good guys, all you do is good, and then people that are on the other side view them as evil. Politics is a perfect example of this. Conservatives view liberals as, you know, evil. Liberals view conservatives as evil, and they're the good ones, and, you know, and things like that. With splitting, you avoid nuance so that you don't have to think about something so thoroughly, right? You can just go ahead and ascribe ill intent or positivity to something. And when you do this, you don't have to analyze your own behavior because you're acting from a good place compared to the evil that you're fighting against. This is a form of reductionism, and in a video I made, Understanding People's Social Games, I talked about reductionism, how people reduce topics to like little things to get their point across or to be right in some sort of instance and to not have to self-reflect. So that's splitting, viewing things from one extreme to another. I actually have a quote that I really liked about splitting. It says, quote, "Younger people may be prone to splitting behavior, for instance, because they're still developing their sense of self and may not yet be capable of integrating polarized viewpoints or feelings of ambivalence. Older people may also engage in splitting at times, particularly when it comes to long-held beliefs such as those related to politics or religion." I really like that quote because, you know, with younger people, they can be susceptible to splitting because their ability to think dynamically and think from different perspectives could be limited, right? Based off just limited life experience and limited like just world education. So they can very much view things as black or white. With older people, they can be stuck in their ways. Maybe they have a good amount of life experience, but they are stuck in a certain decade or a certain time, right? And they want the world to stay that certain way, and they're not willing to see the nuances of things, right? A good example is black people in America, right? Like a lot of times we see all the violence that happens in the black communities, and you see, you know, the different terrible behaviors that some people do that just happen to be black. And we look at their behavior and we're like, okay, these people are bad for what they're doing. And I'm not advocating for what they're doing, but we also have to look at the different infrastructures that they grew up in, right? Like the neighborhoods they've grown up in that just lack funding, that lack resources, their backgrounds that they had no control over. These are the things we also have to look at. And when we start looking at these things, it's like the argument becomes more nuanced because it's not just their behavior, it's like what has led to their environment to be the way that it is that causes them to be how they are. And the truth is, there are people that have grown up in just terrible environments and made something of themselves, and then there are people that have grown up in great environments and just went down the wrong paths, right? So there's a lot of nuance to it. It depends on the environment, it depends on the person, and I'm all about self-accountability. That's what this YouTube channel is all about. But we also have to look at some things that are outside of one's control that influences how their lives, you know, pan out and things like that. When it comes to splitting, this is a defense mechanism we have to really watch. Number 2 is humor. This is actually something I kind of use, and I think I alluded to it in a different video. Humor, it makes you feel good, and it adds a layer of distraction from a problem. It makes the problem a little less serious. As in, like when you're faced with something, instead of initially having to react to it very seriously, you can use humor to feel better at the moment, and then later you can react to it more rationally. Depending on the situation, this is honestly, it's a solid way of dealing with things and kind of cope, because it signals to the mind and the body that at that certain moment, not to panic, right? Because you could get bad news. Of course, bad news, that's subjective, depends on how severe it is to you. But some bad news, you can really react to it with humor, whether it's very light humor related to the actual event or light humor towards like what you did to cause that event. And I don't mean self-deprecation, because I'm not really a fan of like self-deprecation. I don't think it's healthy, but where you can interject humor, it can really help you deal with situations better, especially initially. And then through time, you don't want to just rely on that humor for that problem or your upcoming problems. You want it to be just a slight thing, and then from there you kind of deal with the situation. And the power of this is just your mind and body will just view the situation as less of a threat, right? You'll have less sensations that cause you to just freeze. And if you don't view yourself as a funny person, trust me, I'm sure you've made yourself laugh. I feel like a lot of people have a funny bone in their body, so just give it a go. And another example of humor, you can kind of go meta sometimes, and you can kind of laugh at the fact that we are all doing these things in life, and at the end of the day, we're just like a grain of sand doing all of these things. We're just a grain of sand on this little rock in the universe, and we're so tiny, and we have all these little problems on this rock. But when we pan out from Earth into the Milky Way, into other galaxies, and then we see, you know, all of this stuff, we start to understand how small we are and how small all of this stuff is. And then like we look at our problems and we're like, okay, this is probably a temporary problem. And if it's a long-term problem, there's gonna be a time where like this problem goes away. So relative to other people's problems, my problem is probably a lot smaller than the problems other people have, right? There's always someone with even bigger problems than you. That's like another angle to this that you should probably think about. Next is interjection. This occurs when a person internalizes the ideas or voices of other people. It usually deals with you just like internalizing authority, right? Whether it's your parents, guardians, or people that have kind of looked over you. They basically live in your mind and they basically make decisions for you, right? You act how they would act. On one hand, it can make you feel like they're kind of with you and they're helping you with decision making, for example. Especially with people that had like maybe parents or caretakers that just did a lot of decisions for them, so you act like them. Or it could be a thing where you're trying to trust your own judgment, but you know you've been internalized to think and behave just like your parents and caretakers, that you can't help to hear their voice when you're doing a certain thing. And this can be limiting because it prevents you from being your own authoritative self, being true to your interests and your desires, and you just placate to what you were taught and what you were brought up to believe and how you were brought up to behave. This is a huge thing you see in religious institutions, right? People that grew up in religious institutions. On one hand, you have a community of people, you have this faith that maybe feels very fulfilling to you, and you feel a connection to whatever God or deity you believe in. But on the other hand, you feel restricted in your ability to make certain decisions, right? Maybe it's how you date, maybe it's the food you eat, maybe it's what you do in your free time. It feels limited, and you hear the voices of those people in your mind. And in the book, The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz actually talked about this. We all have an internal judge, and that judge, it's like it's always there just judging your actions and things like that. And what happens is in early childhood, we listen to our parents very closely. We do what they say. They're our parents, but also they take care of us. Like they're linked to our survival. So if we want to survive, we need to follow like this person that has been taking care of us, which makes a lot of sense. But what happens is their rules and their beliefs, it starts getting ingrained in our minds, and then we start to they start living in our minds, and it prevents us from kind of living our own authentic lives. I found a really nice quote about interjection, and it says, quote, "A child might take on elements of parents' personalities or beliefs by adopting their political ideology, concept of right and wrong, or ideas about sex. When people interject, they identify with a person or object so strongly that they cannot separate that person or object from themselves." And here's another quote I like about this. "Interjections involve attitudes, behaviors, emotions, and perceptions that are usually obtained from influential or authoritative people in one's life. They are neither digested nor analyzed. They are simply adopted as part of one's personality as concepts that one considers should be believed or behaviors that one thinks ought to be followed. Interjections do not involve an individual's personal integrity or morality." So that's interjection for you. And then number 4 is undoing. So this is when you compensate for something that you know isn't right, or you compensate for something that has made you feel kind of bad. This one's really good to give examples for, so I'm going to give a bunch. So a good example is when you're procrastinating like for most of the day, like you haven't done anything up until like 4 p.m. the entire day, and then from like 4 p.m. to like 10 p.m. you do a whole bunch of work. You've procrastinated, and now you're doing a bunch of work work in order to compensate for what you haven't gotten done. This makes you feel better about procrastinating on the work. So you're basically undoing your previous behavior by doing a new behavior. Another example is, let's say a husband, yells at his wife very aggressively. His undoing could be giving her a gift 2 days later. Undoing doesn't necessarily have to involve saying sorry. That's the thing. Because as an ego defense mechanism, you don't have to necessarily outright say that you were wrong, right? By not saying that you were wrong, the ego doesn't feel like it is wrong. It can just skip over that and then kind of make the situation better. So this isn't a replacement for saying sorry when you're in the wrong of something. You should say sorry when you are, but people kind of do the undoingness in order to avoid that saying I'm sorry, and then to make up for things. And you have to be careful because this can make people feel kind of weird, right? Especially when you don't address certain situations, or it's like implied but it's not really addressed. That's something you want to be careful for. A good example I see of undoing in my life is when I'm driving and I come to a red light, and then I'm the second car. There's one car in front of me, and then the light turns green and the car hasn't gone yet. And the car is just sitting there. Maybe the person's on their phone, maybe they're distracted or something. And then I honk, and then the person like immediately just starts going, right? Just starts booking it forward. And they're making up for the fact that they held up the line of cars behind them by going very fast ahead. And then you notice the person just driving off. It's because they want to compensate for the delay. They want to compensate for it. There was missed time. Like let's say it was 6 seconds. Like it took them 6 seconds to go. After the light turned green. When they notice that, they immediately just go forward because they're making up for that time and kind of their wrongdoing, if you will. So guys, those are 4 ego defense mechanisms that you now know of. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe. Have a great rest of the day and take care.